Story 1. Bad News. By Cyan Writes.
It was about 4 weeks ago when it started. I have a subscription to receive my town's local paper by mail, as I like to get caught up on current affairs over breakfast. Every Thursday for the past 10 years, this had been my routine, except one day, the paper arrived a day late. I was a little annoyed, but I didn't particularly mind. I just went without on Thursday morning and read it Friday instead. The front page story was about how a crazed serial killer had escaped from a maximum security prison on the outskirts of the town, belonging to our neighboring city. That was a little worrying, but I had faith that he would be caught quickly. A crazed serial killer would stick out like a sore thumb in this quiet town. The same thing happened the next week. The paper did not show up on Thursday. I rang up my delivery man, and he promised me that it had been delivered. I found this odd, and decided to wait until the next morning, where sure enough, the paper was delivered. As I read through it, I noticed that certain words had been circled throughout the issue. They didn't make much sense, so I wrote down every single word in the paper that was circled. They read you, thanks, the home, living. This puzzled me. I began to suspect that somebody was vandalizing my papers. It then clicked in my head that this was the reason they were late. Somebody was taking them from my lawn, circling random words, and then giving them back the next day. It was probably some punk kid's idea of a prank. Next week, I was going to catch this punk. On Thursday morning, I got up extra early and kept a lookout from my bedroom window, waiting for 8:30, the time the papers usually arrived. When my clock hit 8:30, there was still no sign, but a margin for error was only to be expected. That's when I heard something smash in the kitchen. I stormed downstairs, wondering if it was that kid. All I found was that a window had blown open and knocked over the vase on the window ledge. But it wasn't windy. It had been a diversion. I ran out to my front lawn, but the paper was gone, and I could still see the delivery man driving away down my street. I should have called the police there, but foolishly, I decided to wait until tomorrow morning to try to catch this kid then. I kept watching from my bedroom window, able to see most of my front lawn and the street beyond. If he approached, I'd see him. But at about 8:35, I heard something slide through my letterbox downstairs. How could I have missed him? I sat down over breakfast as per usual and opened the paper. Many more words were circled this time. On the first page alone, they read out, "Sorry for the break. Cannot let you see me." The second page message read, "Going to gut you like a fish." The third page had nothing, and there were no circled words in the rest of the paper, but written inside the crossword puzzle were the words, "Please God have mercy on me." At that point, I called the police. This was no longer a prank. I had been threatened. I told them all that had transpired, including the messages and my address. As I sat at the table, unmoving, I thought I saw a shadow pass by outside my window. I froze for what felt like eternity, and then, arming myself with a claw hammer, ventured outside. There was nobody there. Nevertheless, I raised the hammer, the hand holding it shaking. After a while, I went back indoors. My fears of an outsider had not receded, but I was too afraid to stand outside the security of my own home any longer. When the cops arrived, they searched my house top to bottom. They told me that these circled messages were the calling card of the serial killer that had escaped 2 weeks ago. The police found the man hiding in my bedroom with a knife, waiting for when I would go up and get ready for work. He was going to kill me. Further search of my house revealed he had been living in my attic, and eyewitness reports from my neighbors told of how he would climb from the attic window, snatch up the paper, and climb back up before dropping it back down the next day. Even though it was all over, I still had trouble sleeping, knowing how close I had come to being murdered. It gave me some relief to see the paper delivered on Thursday the following week. I took it inside and started to read. I stopped in my tracks and stared down at the headline. It felt like my heart was going to stop beating. The story was about how the serial killer was caught, but slaughtered his detaining officers and is now on the run again. I turned to the second page, and scribbled all over it in black pen was the word, "Sorry," in gigantic letters, covering the page entirely. It was the same on every page, except the last one, where there was a drawing of my house and a stick figure with a knife standing where the back door was. There was suddenly a knocking at the back door.
Story 2. Play Something by MrCreepyPasta.
My name is Anastas Bartoswicz and I, as my name suggests, am a Hungarian violinist. I had always loved my job, and I had always loved the new people I would meet whenever I would tour with whatever symphonic orchestra I would play with. It wouldn't be very often that I would write my own music. Nah, I would almost always play someone else's written pieces. Even more infrequent would be for me to publicly play whatever I did write. If I write something, it is not due to my own will. It seems that nothing I do is something that I get to make a choice on anymore. I remember how it all began on one night. How my entire world was plunged into darkness because of one nightmare. In my dream, I was playing a one-man performance. The theater, whichever one it was massive. It could have easily been twice the size of the Royal Opera House in London. The more I think about it, the more it seems impossibly big. I remember there always being only one man in the massive opera house. Sitting in the middle third row, he would always say in his deep, raspy voice, "Play something." "Play what?" I would ask, even though it didn't feel like I was saying anything. This, it would say matter-of-factly. The same sheet music would always appear on my stand. It was the most difficult sheet music I'd ever seen. Yet, I would always sight read it perfectly. Whenever I'd play it, the lights would all go down except for one over me and one over him. Despite having an impossibly bright light shining on him, I could still barely make out his features. The man seemed old. When I'd finish, I'd look up to make eye contact with the man. I knew it was no man. Its face was pale and dead-looking. Where there wasn't rot, I could see the thousands of wrinkles brought on by many millennia of existence. Its eyes were nothing but empty sockets, save for the bluish-green small round orbs in the center that emanated a hypnotic, sedative light. I would always wake up in a sweat after that. The dream and all of its horrible images would haunt my mind for days on end. Just as I would forget about the dream, I would have it again that same night. It got to the point where I would refuse to sleep. The smallest crackles of the floorboards would send me shooting straight up out of bed and turning the light on. There was a change in me, too. Obviously from sleep deprivation, but my mood was unusually sullen. Almost everyone I would see, let alone care for, I'd see as dead, rotting heaps of flesh. These visions brought me to the brink of suicide several times. Thinking back, I shouldn't have listened to the psychiatrist. That maggot-filled walking piece of shit, as the Americans say. The Prozac never helped. I don't even know why that was the only drug prescribed to me. The biggest change by far, though, was the fact that no matter what the music was, how new it was, or how difficult to play it was, I could always sight read it. After about a year, I stopped having the dreams. Life went back to normal, and people looked normal again too. I shrugged everything off as an effect of sleep deprivation. I could still sight read perfectly though. However, now I took it as a blessing. How wrong I was. One day, a package came in the mail. It was not marked, and the packaging was black. It was slender, but tall and long. It was approximately the size of a music folder. My suspicions were affirmed as I opened the package. Intrigued, and a little happy about getting new music, I opened the folder, and all happiness that I had held flushed out of me as fast as the color from my face did. Inside the music folder was the exact same sheet music that appeared in my dream. I burned the music. By now, I knew that I had sold my soul in that damn dream, whether I had intended to or not. That night, I started having the recurring dream again. My career skyrocketed, but I went through withdrawals from reality nonetheless. I would lock myself in my room and write music. The demon's voice would resound in my head day in and day out. "Write something," it would say. "Play it," it would demand as soon as I would finish writing. By then I had basically dropped off the face of the planet. People knew where I was, but never did they dare to interrupt my progress. Weeks later, after accumulating self-written music to the point that wherever I stepped there would be a harsh crunch of paper under my foot, the voice just wanted to hear music. "Play something," it would demand ravenously, and I would mix and match sheet music to please its hunger. The torture never stopped. For the longest time, I would mix music to the point where I had exhausted all my resources. Only then was I allowed out of the demon's powerful grip. I tried running away, only sleeping where my body dropped. I'd stay only one night in each place. I went from friends' houses, to relatively high-end hotels, to the dingiest motels, to squatting in vacant houses, to sleeping on the streets. Every night, the shadows would creep up on me, slowly, like a predator's hands reaching out to its dormant prey without wanting to wake it. My dreams would consist of the demon sitting alone in the opera house, or a new recurring dream in which I was completely paralyzed with him watching over me for what seemed like hours. Each morning that I would wake up showed me a new level of destruction around me. The voices would beckon for me to return home. Sometimes they were sad, other times seductively optimistic, but most of the time, they were filled with a scalding rage. For the longest time, I kept to the back alleyways of buildings, where the only ones to see me were the dregs of society and the worthless strays. I had always hated cats. I would go weeks without eating to the point of near starvation, as to not be around other people. Solitude was part of my life for a very long time. At one point, the voices were constant and furious. Come back. Play something. Come back. Play something. Come back now. Play something now. Would be all I would hear 24 hours a day. I had to go back. I had to play something to appease the demon's fury. It was the only thing I could do. So I went back to my apartment. With new resources to last me months, I want to work on writing. Now I had more music to mix and match so I could spend more time in solitude. Spend more time lulling the beast. Keeping myself from the rest of the world. I admitted defeat. I gave up on saving myself. I'm not the only one for this to have happened to, either. I just have one warning. Don't idolize the superstars, as people call them. They've most likely sold their souls as well. I can't be certain whether they willingly did it or not, but I can be certain that many of them, like me, are damned.
Story 3. No Gifts This Year. By MrCreepyPasta.
When I woke up this morning, I found the house to be empty. It was strange. I seriously doubt that my family would leave for my aunt's house without me on Christmas morning. Something wasn't right. All the miscellaneously placed pictures of me that were on the walls and hearth were gone. All other photos were still in place. Another thing that struck me as odd was the fact that there were no gifts that, just last night, were meticulously put under the tree this morning. What the hell? I thought to myself, everything is gone. Even the shit I left for my parents. Just then I heard a low, guttural growl that made me practically jump out of my skin. I quickly turned my head to see my dog baring her teeth. In a semi-defensive position, she stared at me with a terrified look in her eyes as she growled. I took a step toward her, and she ran into the other room as fast as she could. She did leave a nice piss stain in the carpet though. Shit, I muttered under my breath. Something definitely isn't right. I walked through the house and everything was a mess. Tables and chairs were turned over, and lamps were smashed. It looked as if a tornado went through the place. I felt like shit. I guess a good analogy would be I felt as the house looked. I felt as if a cement truck had just punched me in the gut. I went upstairs to go to the bathroom and wash myself. The smell of cigarette smoke and cheap booze filled the air. I wondered what was going on. In the bathroom I looked in the mirror, and I must say I looked like a picture of the living dead. I was as white as friggin' sour cream. My pupils were dilated to a size I never knew was natural. It was almost as if my eyes themselves were black. Quite disconcerted, I walked through the house at a slow pace, taking my time. I noticed that my father's black suit and tie were missing. That shouldn't be anything disturbing to me. But for some reason I couldn't shake the bad feeling that was coming from deep within my gut. As I walked down the stairs I looked out the window and noticed that my dad's black Cadillac Converge was missing from the driveway. So was my mom's Chrysler 300C. I was pissed that they just left me alone like this. Whatever, it was only 3 miles to my aunt's house. I put on my jacket. I walked out the door quietly, being careful to not scare my dog more than she already was. It was a cold day, which was to be expected on a late December day in Capitol Hill, Boston, Massachusetts. There was a mass of people congregated around the junction around 3 blocks away from my house. I couldn't make out any details, but I could see the outline of a black car. It had hit the side of a 2-family house. The front half of the car was inside the damn living room. I had a natural aversion to things like that. So, Despite being worried about the driver and potential passengers, I kept moving. Nothing else seemed out of the ordinary on my walk. Just your typical Bostonian good morning, which is a bump in the shoulder in any of the several established cusses. I arrived at my aunt's house about 2 hours after setting off. Yes, I took my sweet time. Looking in the window, I could see several family members, nuclear family included, huddled around the table. I was mad as hell, but then I took a good, hard look at everyone inside. All of them had a somber look on their faces for such a joyous holiday. Each person also had a black suit or dress on. By then my anger had faded, and I quietly walked through the door as opposed to bursting through it, which is what I wanted to do at first. As soon as my foot crossed the threshold, a bright light enveloped me. I felt like I was drowning in light, and then everything went dark. When I came to, I walked out of my room, and there was still nothing under the tree. Both cars were still gone. I was more confused than when I woke up this morning. There was no way my parents would have brought me home and left me there to go back to my aunt's house. I decided to go back. Once again, I put my jacket on and left the house. I remembered that about 3 blocks away there was an accident, and I figured I wouldn't be a pussy this time and check it out. The crowd was gone, and there were only 2 squad cars. One was on the corner, and the other was right next to the crashed car. I walked right up to the car and was disturbed by the fact that the cop, eating a donut and reading the Boston Globe, did not take notice of my presence despite the fact that I walked right by them. I dreaded looking inside the car, and I hesitated for a few minutes. I wasn't going to let myself just walk away, even though I felt like I was going to throw up. I bent over and was horrified to see a bloody pulp of a man that looked just like me pinned into his seat by the dashboard. Blood continued to roll down his forehead. His hand still clutched the steering wheel, white-knuckled, and a look of horror was still spread across his face. Rigor mortis is a beautiful thing. In the distance, I saw an ambulance cruising towards the car with lights flashing and the speakers occasionally letting out a beep or two. In a state of disbelief, I rushed around to the back of the car, only to be greeted by the Cadillac insignia. I rushed to the squad car and started yelling at the cop, hoping to get a response. None came. I ran to a nearby driveway and picked up pebbles and started throwing them at the cop's window. He suddenly sat up alert, and he turned his head in my direction. With a quizzical look on his face, he turned his head away as if he didn't see me and went back to his donuts and the morning paper. I ran as fast as I could, but I only got a few feet away when I tripped on something. As I hit the ground and lay there as a bright white light, exactly like the one from before, came over me again. It all came back to me in a flash. Pulling out of the driveway, running through the red light, worried that I would be late, getting T-boned by the damn Kia, shielding my face with my hands from the shattered glass, trying desperately to gain control of the car again, going through the wall of the 2 family, being pinned to my seat by the dashboard, and finally choking on my own blood as it welled up in my lungs. When I woke up this afternoon, I found the house to be empty. It was strange. I seriously doubted my family would leave me asleep while they went to my aunt's house on Christmas Day. Something wasn't right. All the miscellaneously placed pictures of me were off the walls and hearth were gone. All other photos were still in place. Another thing that struck me as odd was the fact that there were no gifts that, just last night, were meticulously put under the tree this morning.
Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to listen to similar stories in future.